Welcome. The theme for this yoga practice will be the 3 common ways that us humans learn. Although, since due to human variation, we're all unique, and the actual answer is as an individual, you and I have our own unique, special way of learning. And the idea is to maybe contemplate and notice how we actually learn. The yin postures in the yin sequence will start off with a toe squat and a shoulder opener. And then saddle pose, the alternative will be Sphinx pose. Dragonfly pose with a lateral bend on both sides. And then both sides of deer pose with a twist. And then finally, caterpillar pose. So useful props. You'll need some sort of a strap or strap-like object. If you don't have a strap, maybe a belt, something that has some length and some sturdiness to it for a couple of quick shoulder openers, that will do. And then if you have a yoga bolster, that could be pretty handy. And if you have some yoga blocks, that could be handy too. You can do the whole practice without any props, or you can gather up even more, maybe extra blankets and pillows. So gather up some props, set your intention for class, and then we'll get started. This practice starts by finding a comfortable seat. And that means taking some time to find one that feels stable and something that's easeful. It can be sitting cross-legged like I am, just on the floor or on a yoga mat. It can be on a prop. Today I'm sitting on this nice comfy yoga bolster. It could mean sitting in some other way if sitting cross-legged doesn't work for you. But the time here is spent giving yourself time to feel rooted and to find your inner ground. You can also do that by bringing your spine up nice and long into a nice neutral position, and that usually means slowly and lightly toning through the core and the torso. Not engaged, but just a light awareness of the stability of the structure of your upper body. You can roll your shoulders up and back, can maybe rock your head from side to side, loosen your jaw, allow your brain to be fuzzy, let the thoughts just kind of float, and you can begin to focus on something that's happening real time. Focus on your breath, so the inhales, the exhales, without changing your breath. And just for a few breaths, notice this here. We'll do a quick bit of breath work after the next couple of nights, your natural breaths, whatever they are. And then we'll do what I call clearing breaths. And clearing breaths just are these nice, big, healthy breaths, just to kind of get a big gulp of oxygen in and get some nice carbon dioxide expelled out here. So after your next exhale, nice, slow, complete, full inhale from filling up your belly, your torso, till it feels completely full, maybe a little bit fuller than normal. And then maybe even your upper body, your shoulders creep up around your ears. And then when you exhale, release all the muscle engagement. Let the air just really flow out. Maybe open your mouth and let it flow out your mouth. That's one cycle. We'll do a few more, maybe 3 or 4 more. Do these at your own pace. Again, on an inhale, nice complete inhale. Maybe shrug your shoulders and then exhale, release your shoulders, air comes out your mouth, if that feels comfortable. If it feels better to let it out your nose, then let it out your nose here. So a few more cycles of this. And just for a while, breathe normally here to just kind of kind of let there be an equilibrium reestablished with your breath here. This is where you find your strap or your belt or whatever you're using for a strap. And I'm going to recommend changing the way you're seated if you can do this. So go ahead and sit back on your heels, knees together. And if that doesn't work for you, come to a different seat. Or if you have a bolster or a block handy, maybe you can sit this way if you put the block underneath your hips, in between your feet, at whatever height you need so that this becomes accessible. Again, some of us just can't sit this way, so if that's the case, go back to how you were seated before here. And then find your strap. Grasp the strap in the middle part of the strap with a few palm lengths of strap in between your hands, and then raise your arms high above your torso, lengthen through your torso and your arm, reach up for the ceiling with your strap in your hands here. And then begin to draw your arms and hands behind your torso, lower your hands out, and you'll have to loosen your hand grip on the strap, let your hands slide away from the strap. And then slowly lower your extended arms and strap until keeping tension on the strap, keeping tension in your arms so that you can feel the compression in the back of your torso. Just enough so that you can make it through and lower the strap all the way behind you. And the idea is to notice and feel the pressure in the back of your torso when you do that. So if you didn't feel anything, then that means you maybe need to keep your hands a little bit closer together. If you felt too much, maybe they need to go a little bit farther apart. On the next inhale, slowly raise your hands and your strap up overhead. Sometimes the instructor cues for your arms to be straight. Obviously my arms are not straight because I've watched myself do this in here, but I'm feeling a lot of tension in the strap, in my arms, and in the back of my torso. So that's what we're trying to feel in this shoulder exercise, and then strap can come forward. And then the idea is to do a few more cycles of this. So you can leave your hands where they ended up, or you can start over, grab the strap, lift the strap and your hands up overhead, high overhead, and then back behind you, and then slowly lower. Try to do this slowly so that you can really feel it. For a lot of us, this is pretty intense. It doesn't really feel that comfortable, but you're feeling the compression of the back of the chest, the torso. Maybe you're feeling some opening in the front of the torso, and then slowly bring it back up and over. And then you can do this 2 or 3 more cycles at your own pace here. So, and you can do this quickly with a breath cadence. Maybe you exhale as you lower it behind you. You inhale back up. You exhale as you lower it in front of you, and then you inhale it back up, and then you exhale behind it. If you like the breath cadence, if you're new to this exercise, then maybe just focus on figuring out what you need to do to get the strap and the arms behind you to feel that kind of opening or that tension or compression here. So maybe 1 more cycle on your own here. And then when you get done with that cycle, we can kind of just shake the arms out. Keep hold of the strap. It might come in useful. So that was the warm-up. The next posture is the first yin posture. It's called a toe squat to create tension in the feet. And we'll add a shoulder opener to it, so it can get a little bit complicated here. And for some of us, it can be pretty intense because we don't do this, maybe if we don't do this often here. So I'll start out with, put the strap next to you. You may or may not need it. We'll start out with just the toe squat. That's kind of the priority here. So you can start out in a hands and knees position, in a table pose, and then tuck your toes under so that your feet are completely flexed and your toes are all kind of grounding into the floor here. And if your pinky toes aren't quite there, you can always kind of reach back and get the pinky toes involved so that they're all flexed underneath your feet here in table pose. Notice how this feels. Now, if this is intense in your toes and your feet, this is your exercise. You just stay here. Otherwise, kind of come into a slight back bend like you're doing a cow pose here, and then press back with your hands and your arms to create more tension in the bottoms of your feet until you are feeling enough oomph. Some of us, we might go all the way back and we might not feel too much, in which case the next stage is to raise your torso up and just sit back on your heels. So this is full toe squat here. And we'll try to stay here for 2 rounds of 2 minutes. And I'm explaining this because if this is really intense, then you just simply stay in the toe squat for as long as you can, and then when it's too much, just unflex your toes. We'll distract ourselves a little bit with a shoulder opener, and that shoulder opener will need the strap. Oh, by the way, if you could almost sit back on your feet, but not quite, a block can be rather useful. You can put a block on whatever height you need, maybe the high height, and sit back on the block, just so that you have a stopping point that's not so deep that you're in pain in your feet, if that helps here. So we'll add a shoulder twist to this, and then we'll stay here. I'll stay here for about 2 minutes here. So maybe we need a stopper here, so I'm putting a stopper here just to make it a little bit less intense on my toes. And then I call this cow face arm. This shoulder opener comes from a traditional yoga posture known as cow face pose. So put the strap in your right hand, raise your right arm up overhead with the strap, then bend the right elbow, bring the right hand behind your head and behind your neck with the strap hanging down. Left arm extends out to the left side away from your shoulder. Bend the left elbow until your left hand is behind your torso, and then work the back of your left hand up between your shoulder blades to find the strap. Some of you might be able to find your hands, but find the strap, work the hands together towards each other until they don't go anymore, until they've created enough oomph in the shoulders. And then this is where we're going to stay. So we'll stay here for another 1.5 minutes or so. This shoulder opener can be pretty intense too. So the idea is you find that place, find your stopping points here. Find that place where it's really intense, but not painful here. Remember the 3 principles of yin. The yin is find your shape, find your edge. Something where you're finding your stopping points, that places of tension and compression. But it's not so bad that you're actually injuring yourself here. Try to remain still. Try not to fidget too much. You can adjust. You can constantly adjust to go deeper or less deep or come out and rest. Fidgeting is when you're just bored and you're completely coming out of the posture because you've lost track that you're actually practicing yin yoga. So stillness is to just find the patience and the fortitude to actually stay. And then finally, time. Time is what really sinks into the connective tissue here. So we just have one more breath here on this side. And then go ahead and release the strap. You might want to give your feet and toes a break here. This is where you decide, we have another side to do here. So you can either decide to do the toe squat again, but if that was so intense that you've had enough of that, then come to a different seat. You can come to sit back on your heels, or you can come to a cross-legged seated position. Otherwise, we'll get set up for the other side. So when you're kind of ready for the other side here, then the strap goes in the left hand this time. Raise the left arm and the strap up over your head, bend the left elbow, bring the left hand behind your head and your neck. Right arm extends out to the right, palm faces towards the wall behind you, bend the right elbow to bring the right hand behind your torso. And then walk the hands together along the strap. Grab the strap with both hands. Again, you might be able to find both hands with your strap here. And then the left arm tries to point, elbow tries to point up towards the ceiling, right elbow tries to point down towards the ground here. This is a little bit yang, this cow face arms pose. This is another reason why we're not holding this very long, because it can be pretty intense in the shoulders. It can be pretty intense in the feet if you're not used to this toe squat here. And then just notice where the intensity is. And you might notice all the different places here. So later I'm going to kind of talk about these three major types of learning, and you might have already guessed that in yin yoga, the most effective way is the kinesthetic way, is feeling out the postures yourself. So how does this feel? How is your edge feeling? You need to make an adjustment here. So about 3 more breaths here. And then when you're ready, release the strap. Untuck the toes. When you untuck the toes, if that was a lot for your feet, you can kind of tap your feet onto the ground. The counter pose exercise will just be a few cat and cows here at your own pace. So the nice cow pose, back bend, and then a gentle forward bend in this table. Hands and knees here, and then you're just rolling your back up and down between cat and cow pose here, just to kind of work out the kinks and maybe the desperation from those postures. And then we'll get set up for the next yin posture. This one is saddle pose. And we'll try a bolster for this posture. But you can also do this without a posture. And there's an alternative for this if this is not accessible for your knees or your ankles here. So for saddle pose, you start with, again, sitting on or in between your heels. Here, I'm sitting on my heels. You can sit in between the heels. And again, if this doesn't work for you, then probably Sphinx is what you'll use as a backup here. So if you know what Sphinx is, you can move yourself into Sphinx pose here. If you have a bolster, maybe take the narrow end of a bolster, bring it up behind your torso here so that it's snug against the back of your pelvic bone. And then slowly lower yourself back. Do this slowly so that if you need to stop at any point, you can here. Maybe just hang out on your arms or maybe even your elbows. But maybe you make it all the way back onto the bolster or maybe even to the ground here. Knees can float, they can float apart, maybe they stay on the ground. But this time we'll stay here in saddle pose for a little bit longer, so for about 3 minutes or so. So again, find your edge. Maybe this is too deep. Maybe this is not deep enough. Give yourself permission to adjust this. But I'll demonstrate the alternative for saddle. And saddle is essentially a back bend, particularly if you're using a bolster or a prop. So the alternative for saddle is actually Sphinx. So for Sphinx, you come on to your belly, legs comfortably extended out behind you, and then bring your elbows underneath your shoulders, shoulder width apart. And then head can stay up, head can hang, can have a block underneath your head to just kind of brace your head here. Allow the muscles in your torso to relax, to let your spine sag from your shoulders down towards down towards the ground here. So your upper arm bones are trying to support your torso. So if you're having to engage a lot of muscles to maintain Sphinx, experiment with moving your elbows around to see if there's a more naturally stable position to where your muscles can relax. So you can just stay here and just kind of notice that very light compression. in your lumbar, in your low back. Otherwise, if you're doing Sphinx, keep track, or saddle pose, keep track of how this is progressing and this is feeling. As we have about 1 more minute here. Little more than a minute to hang out here in saddle pose here. And again, this is maybe not something all of us can do, so you can always come out of saddle if this gets too desperate here. Remember, you still have some inner teachers. Your breath can go and search out those places that are getting desperate and see if you can use your breath cadence to try to soften and calm down those places. Maybe they calm down, maybe they don't. In which case, just listen to and notice those places here. So, in a lot of pedagogy or learning and teaching techniques, they often break down the way humans learn into 3 general categories. Visual learners, people who are verbal learners or auditory learners, and people who are kinesthetic or tactile learners. You can think of that as feeling and touching kind of learning here. Of course, this is an oversimplification because human beings are infinitely diverse. In reality, each one of us learns in our own very unique and special way. So the real answer is how do you learn is probably none of the above, but a little bit of everything. And maybe there is a common dominant way that you actually learn. But the answer is a lot of us don't know until we stop and notice how we learn. And sometimes it can be surprising here. So 1 more breath here, and then slowly make your way out of Sphinx or saddle pose. If you're in saddle pose, slowly engage the muscles in your torso, maybe root your arms into the ground to kind of help you inch yourself. You can grunt and groan too, if you need to slowly bring yourself up and out of saddle pose here. And then if there's some movement, I will suggest windshield wiper pose here. So you can come back to sit, extend your legs out front. Again, you can sit up on a bolster like I'm doing or just on the yoga mat. Bend your knees, put your feet on the floor, put your feet mat width, which means fairly wide. Hands behind you, rooted into the ground, and then lower both knees over to one side. Bring them back up to center, lower them to the other side, and then windshield wiper them back and forth a few times, just to loosen up stuff in the hip area here. And then the next yin posture will be Dragonfly Pose with a lateral bend on both sides. So we'll be spending a considerable amount of time in Dragonfly Pose. So Dragonfly is you're seated with legs out in front, extended as much as they extend, and then you move the legs out to either side as wide as they go for you. So this is basically wide-legged seated pose here. Knees can be slightly bent if they need to be. They can be straight here. You're trying to ultimately relax the muscles in your legs. So if your legs naturally roll out or roll in, let them do that here. My legs, for whatever reason, are just like wanting to point straight up, which is great if this was a yang class, but it's a yin class. And so we're trying to stay soft in the legs here. So this is where maybe another prop is handy. So if you have a block, place a block on next to your right knee here, because we'll add a lateral bend to this. If you're not really wanting to do a lateral bend, you can just stay here in this hip opener. You can fold forward, which is kind of the regular dragonfly pose here. Otherwise, grow up tall through your torso and turn and face your left leg. This will make it a little bit easier to laterally bend over the right leg. Once you've turned and faced the left leg, just gently laterally bend over the right leg. I like to take my left arm and bring it behind me just to encourage the left shoulder to stay back. So this is more of a lateral bend rather than a forward bend. And then what you can do is you can actually just let everything hang in midair. Your right arm can just hang or rest on the leg. Your head and neck can hang here. But the usefulness of a prop like a block is you can rest your elbow on the block, and then you can put your head on your hand or your forearm to let your head and your neck be just stable, and then just kind of let your body stop wherever it stops in this lateral bend. Remember, you have different heights with the block. So if you need to go lower, you can go lower. You can go higher. Maybe you don't have a block, maybe you have books, so you just add more books or take more books away. And we'll actually stay here now for a couple more minutes. So we'll stay for about 3 minutes on this side of the lateral bend, and then we'll stay for 3 minutes on the other side of the lateral bend, which means we'll get a total of about 6 minutes in dragonfly legs here. So if you need a break from dragonfly legs, then maybe do something else for the other side of the lateral bend, like half butterfly. But I'll get back to this idea of the ways we learn in the world, and probably one of the most well-known ways is the visual way of learning. This is how you learn everywhere in yoga. If you can easily watch a YouTube video like this and follow along in a yoga class and kind of sort of do what the instructor like me is suggesting that you do, you're probably a visual learner, mainly a visual, a little bit of a verbal learner, but you obviously can just see somebody do something and then mimic it yourself. So in the context of a yoga instruction, right, that's visual learning. That's fairly straightforward. If like, oh, I see somebody do it, I can mimic it, and hopefully you're doing your version of that mimicking instead of driving yourself into pain to look exactly like them. The second kind of common is the verbal part or the audio part of learning, and that means we need to hear things. For us humans who we love to listen to words and to talk, and so we can often follow along with visual, with cues, with some sort of verbal cue. It's like, okay, leg here, arm here, twist here, feel some traction here, and this is what we need to actually follow in a yoga practice here. So about 3 or 4 more breaths here on this side of the lateral bend dragonfly. And again, if you're a verbal person, if the yoga instructor is really good at verbal cues, then again, it's easy to follow along to a yoga video, to just kind of do whatever practice it is, yin practice, yang practice, vinyasa practice. It's and a lot of us are visual and or verbal learners, which means we can switch on a video and we can do this yoga practice, which you obviously are doing now if you're listening to these words at this moment. One more breath here. And then the first thing to do is slowly bring yourself out of the lateral bend. So bring yourself up, maybe do a little bit of twist or motion if there's a lot of weirdness in your torso from that lateral bend. If you need a break from the wide-legged position, go ahead and give yourself a break. Bring your legs in, bend your knees, flex and point the feet, give yourself a little bit of a break, because we're doing this again on the other side. So this is some free form yoga, some counter pose time. But when you are ready, then bring your legs back out to whatever edge is, and maybe it's different this time. Maybe it's not so deep. It's like, oh, I didn't know we were going to be doing this for 6 minutes, so I'll learn next time not to bring my legs quite as far out here or as straight. Maybe they need to be a little bit more bent. We're doing the lateral bend on this side now, so if you want to use a prop, it's on the left side here. Grow up straight and tall through your torso just to make it easier to twist, and then twist and face the right leg so that we can laterally bend, and go ahead and laterally bend your torso over the left leg. And again, if you're wanting to keep the right shoulder back a bit, an easy thing to do is to just allow your right arm to be behind your torso. And then, kind of up to you, if you want to just let your left arm hang and your head and your neck hang here. Letting your head and your neck hang for the long periods of time, you might get really, really desperate. So this is where the prop is handy, because you can still do the lateral bend here. But this time, head and neck can be resting on your forearm, which is resting on the block. Elbows on the block, and your head and your head is resting on your hand here. And then we'll stay on this side. And you adjust this again. So if it's a little bit too high, you're not really feeling anything or finding a stopping point, you'll go a little bit lower or no block at all here. Or if it's too intense, come up onto a higher setting on the block. And now you just hang out here for time. The third generic category of learning is, the fancy word is kinesthetic. Another word is called tactile. Now in the realm of yoga instruction and yoga teaching, often that's instructors think about physical adjustment. So if they're trying to explain something to a person, a practitioner, and verbal and visual cues aren't getting the idea across to them, then maybe they will ask if they can actually do a physical adjustment to kind of emphasize the point of the posture. And indeed, that's the only way some people actually can learn to get into a posture, is to actually be physically moved. Because they're not verbal learners and they're not visual learners. And when I used to teach in-person classes, I actually got a few purely kinesthetic learners who you could show them how to do a pose, you could tell them how to do a pose, and I finally realized it wasn't registering to them. So I actually had to move them myself into the pose. Luckily they were fine with me moving them into the pose. And I realized, this is what kinesthetic learning, tactile learning actually means. It's like people have to be physically touched and feel this in order to get into the posture. But it's more than that, because it is tactile, and kinesthetic learning is this feeling. And it doesn't have to happen from an external source. It doesn't have to happen from an instructor. It happens when you are feeling the posture yourself and you know this is what you want. So you get yourself into a posture and you decide if it's the posture you're wanting to practice by the feedback from your physical sensations. That's tactile learning. In yin yoga, that means noticing your stopping points, the places of compression and tension that you feel stop you here. And so that's kinesthetic learning. And so maybe we're utilizing all three right now. We're feeling the posture. You're looking at the video at me to see what I'm doing. You're listening to my instructions of what I'm saying that's verbal. That's why I say we're using all three, maybe, even though there might be a predominant one. So just one more breath here on this side of Dragonfly. And then slowly bring yourself up. When you get up, maybe work out the kinks in your torso with some twists or maybe a back bend here. And then the legs can come together. That was a long time in Dragonfly for the legs. So it's okay if you have to use your arms to slowly bring your legs out of Dragonfly. And then whatever kind of little motions you need to do, you can like point and flex your feet while their legs are extended, or you can make circles with your feet here, or you can bend your knees here a bit. We're moving in. The next yin posture is known as deer pose. It's asymmetric, so there's two sides to it. And we'll add a twist to each side. It has a little bit of a yang element in the twist, so we'll only stay for a couple minutes per side. If you're really flexible in the hips, you might be able to do deer pose without a prop. I'm going to demonstrate the prop sitting on. Well, instead of the bolster, I'm going to sit on a block here. And then demonstrate the first side of deer pose. So you start seated, legs extended out front. Deer pose is with one leg internally rotated and with one leg externally rotated. So bend your left knee and bring the left heel on the outside of your left hip. And then bring this left knee over to the left, away from your center line as far as it goes here. So that's the internally rotated leg here. The externally rotated leg is the right leg. Just bend the right knee, bring the right heel in towards center here. And now you can play around with this to figure out how much intensity you want. Deer pose is kind of weird in that sometimes we don't feel much, but we definitely come to a stopping point in that the leg and the hip just don't move anymore. But that's just where it is here. If you're looking for more intensity, bring the heel away from the hip in whatever leg or both legs here. I'm not very well internally rotated, so my heel has to stay in. I can move the externally rotated heel out here. So this is essentially deer pose here. And I'm sitting on a block so that I can kind of root through both sits bones here. Otherwise, I'd only be on one sit bone here. You can stay here if you're feeling a lot. Otherwise, we'll add a twist to this for a couple of minutes. So I would suggest extend your arms out shoulder height. Fingers point away from each other. Left fingers and right fingers here. Grow long here. Grow long and neutral through your torso. And then twist gently to the right. So over the externally rotated right leg here. And then when you can kind of stop here, you can lower your hands down to the ground. Maybe the left hand rests on the right thigh or the right knee. Right hand is behind you. And then just come into a nice torso twist here. So this is the twist. Again, there's a little bit of muscle engagement to maintain the twist, which is why we're only going to stay here for 2 minutes here. And now we're getting to the point where you can start asking yourself, the real point to this little monologue is begin to notice what kind of learner you are. Are you predominantly a visual learner, a verbal learner, or a tactile or kinesthetic learner? And maybe it's obvious to you if you're one of those. Maybe it's not obvious that you're any of those, and that's okay because you're a unique human being. But maybe this is where you decide to think about what do you actually need to be engaged in the learning process. In yoga or in any other activity, us adults tend to stop learning because we think we know everything. But we can continue to learn and we continue to learn at a very fast rate if we understand the best way that we learn here. So about two more breaths here in this twist here. What's your way of learning? I'm pretty typical. I'm a visual learner, so I'm just wanting someone to show me the basic basic way a posture looks like, and then I'll find my version of that posture. And go ahead and release the twist, bring yourself back. Maybe do a counter twist, but we're twisting to the other side here in a moment anyway here. And then slowly come out of deer pose on this side. Maybe you have to lean back, and maybe you have to bring both legs out front here. Maybe you have to take a break for a while. But the best counter pose to deer pose is the other side of deer pose. So then the right knee, bring the right heel on the outside of the right hip. And then you can move the right knee away from your front center line to the right. Left knee bends, bring the left heel in towards your front hip here. Left knee's out wide, and you can move the knees out as far as you wish here. You can play around with keeping the heels in close to your hips or moving them away from your hips just to see how it changes the sensation, changes the experience. Again, deer pose is kind of a subtle pose here. If you would like to do the twist, go up tall through your torso to make it easier to twist, and then twist to the left, so over the externally rotated left leg here. Find your stopping point here, and then we'll stay here a couple more minutes. And as you're finding your edge, as you're finding your breath, come back to this question of, how do you think you learn here? Again, my hint is, if you're following easily along with this yoga video on YouTube, obviously you're a pretty good visual and verbal learner already. But there may be other ways you learn too. And in yoga, the main other way is to actually feel the sensations. In fact, in the end, that's maybe the most important experience, is to develop a yoga practice based on your internal sensations. But we can ask for a little bit of help. Sometimes we don't have an external yoga instructor handy to give us physical adjustments or to show us what area of the body they're trying to get into. So we try to feel this ourselves, and maybe we don't quite know what location we're feeling that stopping point here. One more minute in this twist. So you can give yourself permission to actually touch here. It's like when you're in this posture, where are you feeling sensation? And to reinforce that idea, maybe you can actually take a couple fingers and gently touch some area where you're feeling some sort of tension. I'm feeling compression in my spine. I'm feeling tension along the outside of my torso here. I'm feeling light traction in around my legs, where in this hip opener here. I can maybe think about where I'm feeling that and then actually just physically pointing to it. So you can do that too, particularly in a yoga, when you're watching a yoga video, you're maybe by yourself, and so it's like, yeah, it's feeling really intense right here. And you can take your fingers and actually point to it. This is part of the kinesthetic or tactile learning process here. So just one final breath here. And then slowly bring yourself out of the twist. If you were in the twist, maybe a nice counter twist would be good here. And then slowly extend the legs out in front here. The next yin posture is actually caterpillar pose, which has the legs extended. So that might be a nice counter pose to all the bent knee hip openers that we had. The last intense yin posture. Again, you can do this with no props. I think I'll demonstrate this still seated up on a block, just to have some height underneath my sits bones. And can do this with a blanket too. Legs are extended. Knees can be straight, or knees can be slightly bent, or knees can be really bent. You can have padding. You can actually put a lot of padding under the knees so that they can stay bent and out of pain's way here. And then for caterpillar, just gently fold forward. Round and relax your spine. Relax your legs so the legs may fall out or fall in, depending on if you're externally and internally rotated. If I don't want them to fall out too much, I use my arms as props. I bring my arms up alongside my legs just to kind of, so that the legs can actually relax, but they stay sort of, they don't roll out too much, but it's okay if they roll out too. And then you can use as many props as you want to support your torso here. We'll stay here for about 3 minutes in caterpillar. For some of us, caterpillar is a really, really intense posture. Maybe it's a little bit too intense. And we're feeling that. We learn that we're hurting ourselves in a kinesthetic way. So maybe come into butterfly, bend your knees, put your bottoms of your feet together. And maybe that's a little bit more accessible here. So traditionally speaking, subtle energy speaking, caterpillar pose is seen as a very introspective yoga posture here. This is, you're making an inward curling shape, and so it's an inward looking posture. So this is maybe a good time to just notice your breath, notice your thoughts, and maybe take note of how you're learning about your own body, which is the ultimate kind of, the main reason we're practicing yoga is we're trying to better understand our being and to experience and feel what it's like to be a human. And that takes all kinds of different kinds of learning. Maybe a lot more than just these 3 main kinds that we talk about: visual, verbal, and tactile. But again, it's good to notice. It's good to notice how you learn. If you're not a visual learner and you're not a verbal learner, well, then you're not watching. I can guarantee you're not watching this video. You're not going to waste your time. You're finding your ways to learn yoga. And that might be just exploring these postures all by yourself. So we have about one more minute in caterpillar. It's okay to come out early if you need to come out early. And it's okay to stay longer if you need to stay longer here. One last breath here. And then when you're ready, maybe use your hands and your arms on the floor to slowly bring your torso back up. And if there's a lot of rebound and reverberation there, give yourself permission to do a little wiggling around to work out the kinks here. That was the final long yin posture before integration and rest here for a moment here. So maybe a little bit of integration and then resting pose here. So make your way onto your back, bend your knees and draw your knees into your chest and give your knees a big hug here in this kind of restorative little rolled up posture here. You can just stay here and hug your knees, or you can do a little bit of a hip warm up here. So grab each knee with each hand and then pull your knees into your torso and then draw your knees away from each other. Right knee out to the right, left knee out to the left as far as they go until they don't go anymore. And then draw them forward away from you with your hands and back together with your arms extended, and then draw your knees all the way back into your torso. So you're making these independent knee circles that are moving in the opposite, each knee is moving in the opposite direction of the other. And the idea is you're working your hip sockets here with this exercise. After you've made a couple of circles in one direction, switch directions and go in the opposite direction. So 2 or 3 cycles here. And then at some point, when your knees are back together, roll over to one side. Prepare yourself for your resting pose. Now that might mean that you do a little bit of free-form yoga, your own postures, something, your own integration that you need to balance out any kinks. And then come into your last restorative resting posture. I'm going to suggest legs up the wall. But you can do something else. You can sit in meditation, or you can do a traditional shavasana where you're lying on the floor here. So for legs up the wall, you'll sit sideways next to the wall, maybe with some padding ready to put underneath your hips or not. And then you roll your legs up. I always like to say the hardest part about legs up the wall is getting into legs up the wall. It might take a few attempts. And then when your legs are up the wall here, then kind of inch around so that your head, neck, torso are all comfortable, arms are extended. Arms far enough away from your torso so that your palms can face up. And oh, by the way, you can always put a pillow underneath your head. And oh, by the way, you can always put blankets or clothing on if you get chilly here. And this is the way we can in practice. So this is where we cultivate the feeling of solidity. So we're feeling the contacts that our body makes with whatever we're lying on, the floor, yoga mat, bolster, or blanket. Again, this is tactile, this is kinesthetic learning, as we're learning where we're connected to the ground, where we're connected to the earth. And if it doesn't feel stable, then find a prop to make it feel stable, or find a different position to make it feel stable. Soften your face, so maybe wiggle your jaw around to release your jaw, the inside of your mouth. Soften the skin around the outside of your mouth, so soften your nose, your cheeks, your chin, skin around each ear. Soften the skin around your eyes, the muscles in your eye sockets. Soften that space in between your eyes, the third eye. Soften your forehead and your temples, the crown of your head. Soften your thoughts. Maybe cultivate a little bit more fuzziness and acceptance, so that your thoughts can just drift in and drift out without having to latch onto them. You can just, for now, give them permission to float in and to float out without any criticism or analysis here. Soften down through your shoulders, collarbones, shoulder blades. Maybe release your right arm, right palm, right fingers. Left arm, left palm, and left fingers. Notice the tips of your fingers. See if you can actually feel some sensation, maybe tingling, maybe pulsing in the tips of all of your fingers on your right hand and on your left hand. And continue to soften down through the rest of your torso, so rib cage is released, abdomen is soft, hips are relaxed, thighs at ease, knees, shins, calves relaxed,
ankles, heels, the soles and the tops of your feet, all of your toes on each foot, releasing, and then see if you can notice that same sensation, that same kinesthetic, tactile feeling on the very tips of your toes. Toes on your right foot, the toes on your left foot. Noticing yourself, noticing your own energy. And release, relax, and surrender your body, mind 100%. At some point, begin to deepen your breath. And you can start to make little movements with fingers, little movements with toes. Expand that motion into wrists and into ankles. Make little motions with legs, with arms. You can gently rock your head from side to side. If you're in legs up the wall pose, you can maybe gently bend your knees and place your feet against the wall, and then maybe inch yourself back just a little bit to make it easier to slowly roll over onto your side. When you get there on your side, stay there for a moment. Cultivate a deep sense of gratitude for your practice, but also a deep sense of gratitude for you. Your unique embodiment in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. And then when you're ready, bring yourself up to a comfortable seat. When you get there, bring your hands together in front of heart center, and I'll end practice with an Om. The inner light in me honors the inner light in you. Namaste.